All right. Thank you for allowing me to share with you Ocular's vision for the future in 2023. My name is Andrew Moshfeghi. I'm a retina specialist at the University of Southern California, and I have been a consultant for Ocular going on 3 years now, especially with respect to Retina. These are the forward-looking statements. We'll also discuss investigational agents. So with respect to Ocular Therapeutix, this is really a platform company that's built on this proven hydrogel technology that allows for long duration of action. It's been safely utilized in the medical field for over 30 years now. And with respect to ocular disease, we now have lots of data on this technology. Moving forward, we're going to be looking at diabetic retinopathy, age-related macular degeneration, as well as a host of other ocular conditions as shown here. So at the bottom, you can see that there is already dexamethasone intracanalicular insert available, and then a similar technology is being used for dry eye and ocular inflammation. But we also have assets with respect to glaucoma, gene therapy for inherited retinal diseases, complement inhibitor for dry AMD, and then what I'll focus on the most today will be OTX-TKI, looking at age-related macular degeneration specifically, and we'll talk a little bit about diabetic retinopathy as well. So what is OTX-TKI? This is a tyrosine kinase inhibitor in the form of axitinib, which is coupled with the company's proprietary hydrogel platform to allow for a targeted, sustained drug release over time. And axitinib is a really good choice. Number one, it's available. It's used for renal cell carcinoma, FDA approved for that indication. And it also has a very low dissociation constant, making it quite potent. This is delivered via small needle gauge into the vitreous cavity in a single 600 microgram insert. Today we'll talk about two different studies. One is a study that was carried out in Australia, largely during the pandemic, right at the beginning of the pandemic. 29 subjects dosed with varying dosages of OTX-TKI. And then the US phase 1 study that looked at really just one dose, and that's a randomized controlled study against Eylea. So with respect to the Australia study, we can see here, this was a phase 1 first-in-human study. These were patients were sort of the worst of the worst wet AMD patients coming in with all sorts of advanced disease, subretinal fibrosis, atrophy, hemorrhage, lipid, etc. And patients were either given 200, 400, or 600 micrograms of axitinib coupled with the hydrogel implant. These patients were followed over time. So this study, patients are coming in with wet AMD. They could have had prior treatment or treatment naive, and they were then just given that single implant. No additional mandated treatments were provided. This is just one patient from that study who did particularly well. This is a patient in cohort 3A, the 600 microgram cohort. This is a treatment naive patient who by the time they got to the third cohort of patients, the investigators were comfortable enrolling some treatment naive patients like this one who had a fair amount of fluid, subretinal hyperreflective material at baseline. And then this patient, without any anti-VEGF, had a quite noticeable improvement in the macular anatomy with nice improvement in the visual acuity as well. And this is, patients like this helped drive the data that we see on the right with a generalized reduction in central subfield thickness. And even in these advanced patients, we're still seeing stable vision. This is a swim lane plot showing each of the cohorts. On the left in the gray, you can see their run-in historical anti-VEGF treatment requirement. And you can see that there's fewer of those diamonds on the right-hand side of the vertical line, especially in cohort 3A, where 5 out of the 6 patients were treatment naive. And those patients, hardly any of them required anti-VEGF rescue during the first 6 months of therapy. So it was really that study with really significantly advanced wet AMD patients that formed the basis of saying, well, we see a biological signal here, let's move forward in the US, but let's do it a little bit differently. Let's bring in patients who are already controlled with wet AMD, and then let's expose them to our drug and see how long they can go without requiring a treatment. So we had an IND from the FDA that allowed us to do this. There's the TKI arm. Patients receive the implant at baseline. And then 1 month later, they get an Eylea injection, but then that's the only mandated Eylea injection that they get. This drug takes a little bit of time to get working, and so we wanted to cover them during the first couple of months when the drug is being initiated. And this was up against aflibercept on label Q8-week dosing. So we can see here that there was stability of vision over that time period and stable central subfield thickness as well. But what really impressed us was how many patients did not require a subsequent treatment. 80% of patients through month 6 in the US study did not require retreatment, and 73% of patients through month 7 did not require it. And this is borne out in this swim lane plot here. You can see everyone got dosed at baseline with TKI, then a month later, everyone got Eylea, but then post-treatment, you really see a significant reduction, 93% treatment reduction over time. Here's a patient from that study with a historical image on top showing how the patient presented in the past with stigmata of wet AMD. By the time of study baseline, they were controlled, and that control remained in place through month 7. Here's another patient with a very similar experience, big PED historically at baseline, got under control, lots of subretinal fluid. By the time they were in the study, controlled and largely remained that way throughout the end of the study. There was one case of endophthalmitis, but this occurred following the Eylea injection and not following the OTX-TKI, and that patient did well as 2020. So in summary, with respect to OTX-TKI in wet AMD, it's really exciting based upon the Australian and the US study with really good durability and surprisingly good control in patients who had treatment naive with just this OTX-TKI, especially in the Australia study. So we will present at angiogenesis additional data from the US study, 9 and 10 month data, and we plan to initiate a phase 2/3 wet AMD study in Q3 2023. And then we'll also be going into diabetic retinopathy in just a couple of months, in not diabetic macular edema, but diabetic retinopathy. And we think that there is a great opportunity there, and then hopefully with pivotal studies to follow the following year. Mina already went over the need for diabetic retinopathy treatment, and we all agree that even just quarterly anti-VEGFs may be too frequent for this asymptomatic condition where patients have just diabetic retinopathy without diabetic macular edema. So giving something that can last a really long time really is what we need, and this drug has the potential to go out to 9 and 12 months and possibly longer. In addition to this hydrogel-based platform that I talked about for wet AMD and diabetic retinopathy, like I said, there is steps moving forward to look at complement inhibition through the Mosaic asset for geographic atrophy, and then ocular gene therapy program as well. Thank you for your attention.